Welcome to 2019. I'm Sandra Dimas.
And I'm Brian Rollenbacher.
And we have an exciting and festive show for you today.
That's right. We're getting close to the holidays.
Yes.
Starting to decorate a little bit.
Yep.
And hopefully some good holiday themed segments will be coming up as we get closer to Christmas.
I know. Well, let's unpack what we are talking about today. So in Culture Talk, what's happening?
You are going to be interviewing Dr. John Lennox on beauty, meaning, and atheism.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was so happy to just be able to talk with John Lennox. So that's going to be an exciting segment. In Give and Take, Jeff will be speaking with Fazale Rana, and he's going to discuss why he is not a theistic evolutionist.
That's going to be a good one. That question comes up a lot, so I'm excited for it.
It does.
First up, though, we have RTB 101. Krista will be interviewing Jeff Zweerink, asking him the question, can our universe come from nothing?
Let's check it out. Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very common question is one of our staff scholars, astrophysicist, Dr. Jeff Zweerink. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Krista. It's good to be here today.
It's good to have you here. Okay, so let's talk about nothing. When we talk about the beginning of the universe, let's start with the Bible, and then we'll get into the science a little bit. What does the Bible have to tell us about the beginning of the universe?
Well, I think one of the biggest things the Bible tells us about the universe is that it did have a beginning. One of the most common verses, maybe outside of John 3:16, is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And as I understand it, that word for created has this connotation of, at least in Genesis, they're bringing something new into existence, something that didn't exist before, if you will. And so, kind of a scientifically way you'd say that is, in the beginning, God created all the space-time matter and energy that there was. He created the entire universe. And so this stands as kind of a foundational truth that there's a beginning to the universe and that time has proceeded from that. And what happens in the past affects what happens in the future, not the other way around. And so those seem to be the key things that the Bible talks about that are relevant to the beginning of the universe.
And when we talk about it theologically, we often use the Latin term ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. And what is it that God does that he creates out of nothing? I'm wondering if you have any insights about that.
Well, that's an interesting question scientifically, because, when we talk about the universe now, we talk about, are we part of a larger multiverse? Are there quantum mechanical realms out there? And what I find interesting about that is if you go back 30 or so years ago in the science, there's kind of like there was the observable universe, what we could see, the space-time matter of our universe, and that was it. That was the sum total of all physical reality. And anything beyond that would have been classified as supernatural. Well, now we're talking about, are we part of a multiverse where there's this vacuum energy density that expands very rapidly, stuff that is entirely bizarre to how our universe behaves. But nonetheless, these are the sorts of things scientifically we're talking about might be beyond the stuff that we can actually see. But really, to me, when we're talking about that biblically, is it's not just, does our universe have some beginning in the midst of some larger context? The Bible seems to talk about there being nothing before that, not other stuff that gets remade into our universe, but outside of God's existence himself, there's nothing beyond that. And God brings the universe out of nothing. There's no laws of physics. There's no funny, weird material, funny, weird laws, anything like that. It's just nothing.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what scientists mean by nothing and what are we talking about when we're talking about the beginning of the universe from a scientific perspective.
Well, scientists can talk about nothing in a lot of different ways. And, Lawrence Krauss wrote a book, A Universe from Nothing, where he kind of talks about the different ways scientists talk about nothing. I mean, you can have a vacuum where there's just no atoms in it. That would be one form of nothing. or you could talk about, where you have no matter and no energy. That would be another form of nothing, but you still have space and time. Or you could talk about a nothing where there's no space, no time, no matter, no energy, at least not in the way we think of it, but there's something larger that gives rise to all of that. And so scientifically, that's actually a relatively difficult term to define, especially when it comes to talking about what forms the universe, because science is actually the description or describing the stuff that is there. So if you're going to do science, you got to have something to work with. So kind of inherent in the process of science is there's something to work with in the first place. And so that does make this a little bit challenging of a question, scientifically speaking.
Very good. So when we think about integrating science and scripture, do you see that the scientific idea of nothing intersects at all with the Christian idea of nothing, or are those two completely separate things?
Well, so when you're talking about a beginning to the universe, that's a very robust scientific idea. In fact, if you look through the history of the 1900s up into the early 2000s, what you see is that there are a lot of ideas that scientists put forth of how the universe could be eternal. And as we either study them more deeply or make measurements of our universe, lo and behold, those ideas where there's something that is responsible for our universe, some physical something, those ideas tend to fall by the wayside as we study the universe more. And so we really are kind of pushing back more and more to where our universe had a beginning, not that there's more stuff out there that gets reformed, but that there is actually something, or our universe comes into existence out of nothing. Whether that's the Big Bang, whether that's the start of the multiverse, whatever you're talking about, it seems like there really is a beginning to our universe where nothing of the physical matter, physical stuff of our universe is adequate to account for its existence.
So as we look into the future a little bit, just really quick, what kind of scientific discoveries might we encourage our non-Christian friends to look forward to if this model is correct?
Well, there's kind of two things I would expect to see. And again, this is based on the data I've seen over the last 100 years, is that scientists will continue to find ways to put forth models or explanations of our universe where it comes from something, whether it be a multiverse, whether it be quantum mechanical realm, whether there's something out there, that they will continue to do that, and to find models where the universe is the eternal, self-existent all there is, if you will. I mean, that's what Krauss is doing. That's what Hawking are both doing. When you look at and analyze their models, ultimately, there's something there, whether it be the laws of physics, that ultimately gives rise to everything. So I expect that scientists will continue to do that. And as we look at models where it rules out any sort of divine causation, where the universe is ultimately all there is, those models will continue to be shown incorrect as we investigate long enough with our scientific process. Again, I've seen that over the last 100 years. I've seen that pattern play out time and time again. And if God is the creator of the universe, we're going to find that the best explanation is the one where he creates the universe out of nothing, that he is the brute reality behind everything, not some sort of eternal space-time, matter, and energy.
Very good. Well, I want to encourage everyone to go check out Jeff's blog, Impact Events, and read more about his thoughts on Lawrence Krauss and his book and all the things about nothing. So go check it out at reasons.org.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about culturally relevant topics and how you can use them to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with special guest, Dr. John Lennox. Thank you for joining us so much.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, so you're all the way across the pond. You are a emeritus professor of mathematics at Oxford University, and we are so happy to have you here. You've just finished working on a film that's coming out soon, Against the Tide. And we've watched the movie, we love it. The whole premise is to really unpack scientific and theological evidence for God. And I love what you say, that the evidence should be what leads us to a decision on whether or not God exists. But we also know that you've debated plenty of atheists who have challenged that. And we have a quote from Dawkins where he says, when you consider the beauty of the world, you almost feel a desire to worship something. What science has now achieved is an emancipation from the impulse to attribute things to a creator. So can you help us unpack that? And are there evidences for alternatives to atheism when we consider beauty?
Well, frankly, what Dawkins says is quite wrong. Science has not achieved an emancipation of the need to worship something. And the very use of the word emancipation gives the game away. It shows that he feels that that is a repression or a suppression of humanity. Science cannot adjudicate on these things in that sense. But I think the exact opposite is true. The more that science has revealed to us of the magnificent beauty and structure and functioning of the universe, the more I'm inclined to worship the genius of the creator that made it, not the less. And so I feel he's simply wrong there. That's his view, that's his belief system, but I don't think it's founded on very strong evidence. The evidence points the other way. And if I might just add, the pioneers of modern science like Galileo and Newton and Kepler, they took the same view that I've just expressed. And the very motivation for them to do their science was that they believed that there was a lawgiver behind the universe.
Right. And I love that, just the idea of coming at science from the perspective of really wanting to explore our creator and explore his creation. So one of the things that you mentioned in Against the Tide is that you don't just answer questions, but you also answer the questioner. And especially now we're longing for meaning and for purpose. But those who are longing for that and don't quite know God yet, they also need that evidence. So what evidence-based claims do you offer a questioner when they're asking about beauty and they're asking about God?
Oh, generic questions are very difficult.
Yes.
It depends, as you know, entirely on the person who's asking the question. And that's why you're right. You need to take the questioner into account. People start from very different points. Some people need, first of all, some factual information. In other words, why would you as a scientist believe in God? And I would point them immediately to the fact that the universe is rationally intelligible. I would talk about the fine-tuning of nature. I would talk about the fact that the universe has a beginning and so on. But you mentioned the term meaning. Mm-hmm. Science doesn't give meaning. It can point towards the source of meaning in God, but it doesn't itself give meaning. I think there we have to consider two very big things. The first is there is a revelation of God in nature. The heavens declare the glory of God, and we often call that general revelation. But then there's a specific revelation, which is given to us through the Bible, through Scripture. And that's where most of the meaning pours in, because what science cannot tell us is that we are made in the image of God. We're made for a purpose. We have been endowed with the dignity of being given the job of stewards of creation. Now that begins to sort out the meaning question. And of course, you can't ask about meaning unless you face questions of the brokenness of human experience, of the suffering and so on. And that brings one closer to the pinnacle of God's revelation in Jesus Christ. Now, when you start thinking about him, you can start at in that sense, the historical scientific level. Did he exist or not? You can go to the ancient historians. But in the end, you have to assess whether the claims he made are evidence-based, which I believe they are, and whether they have a ring of truth. And the meaning in the end is only completely to be found when we enter a relationship. As human beings, the highest relationships, the relationships of life, they're the things that give us most meaning with our spouses, with our children, with our relatives, and with our friends. And that points the way to where the source of meaning is found in the person of God. But that takes us way beyond the natural sciences. But I would want to emphasize it doesn't take us beyond rationality. Science isn't the end of rationality at all. And we need to approach these other aspects of existence, history and experience, for instance, in order to get at the meaning questions.
Yeah, I love that answer because it actually leads to the next one. And you've kind of answered it in a sense. You're talking about history. And really, when you said that science isn't the end of rationality, when we look at history and we look at what we see there and how it points to a historical Jesus, what would be something that you would offer the questioner if they're still not too sure and the science has kind of led them to a stopping point as they're looking for meaning? What evidence, as far as history goes, would you point them to?
Well, the important thing about history is that we need to consult the ancient historians. They're the experts in this. And there it's quite remarkable because in spite of the fact that many of them are not believers in God, that is, they may be atheists or agnostics, there is widespread agreement about the basic facts of Jesus' life, what he did, and so on. And even fair consensus about the fact that he had disciples that claimed to have met him after he was crucified. And of course, the atheists will stop. They don't believe in a resurrection. But the amazing thing is that we can gain so much from the ancient historians. I mentioned some of them in the film. And one of the disadvantages of the film genre is that the questions come pouring out and you can't answer them all. So what I'm doing at the moment, which might interest your viewers and listeners, is I'm writing a companion guide to the film that goes into this particular question and many others in much more depth, giving them actual citations of top ancient historians that build up a real cumulative picture that there's strong evidence for even the strange things that happen, the things we call miracles, the signs. So we've got a strong evidence base that can build up our confidence that what we're dealing with is not fiction, certainly not science fiction, but has a bedrock of history. And that is something on which we can then base our commitments and our experience.
Yes, I love that so much, a bedrock. Thank you so much for that. I look forward to seeing the companion guide to Against the Tide. For those curious to find out about film times and how you can watch the movie, go to againstthetide.movie.
Hello, Jeff Zweerink, and welcome back to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important and challenging scientific ideas to equip you to be more confident in the truth of Christianity. Today, I'm joined again by my colleague, Dr. Fazale Rana, and we're going to ask the question, why is he not a theistic evolutionist? Fuzz, it's good to have you here today.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
So theistic evolution is a pretty popular idea out there, and it kind of has this connotation. If you're a theistic evolutionist, you get to have all the science and be a Christian at the same time. It seems like it's got a lot of benefits to it. But I know you're not a theistic evolutionist. So why are you not a theistic evolutionist?
Yeah, and theistic evolution has been an idea that's been around shortly after Darwin proposed his theory of evolution. Asa Gray, Harvard botanist, was the first scientist to actually embrace and articulate this idea of theistic evolution. And since that time, people have flirted with this idea. Could God have used evolution as a way to create? And yet you and I, Jeff, are old earth creationists, where we don't necessarily embrace the totality of the evolutionary paradigm, where we see some problems with this idea of God using evolution to create. Some of those problems are biblical, some of them are theological. But to me, the primary reason why I am not a theistic evolutionist is because I see some very real scientific challenges to the evolutionary paradigm. And so it's for scientific reasons I'm not a theistic evolutionist, primarily not theological or biblical reasons.
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, I know as you read through the Genesis account, there are certainly language that is used there that indicates God uses process to bring about life. I mean, let the earth sprout plants, if you will. So there's process involved there. But your idea, your comment that you're not a theistic evolutionist primarily because of scientific objections is kind of an interesting one. Kind of flesh out for us, what are some of those objections that lead you to be skeptical of the science or of the evolutionary process?
Well, to me, the one primary issue that I have is that evolutionary processes cannot account for the key transitions in the history of life. And in the 1970s, the late famous Russian geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Yet, the evolutionary paradigm cannot account for things like the origin of life. And that to me was really significant because it was the inability of evolution to explain the origin of life that convinced me that there had to be a creator, and that opened me up to hearing the gospel.
So is this a sort of thing, you know, we're talking about chemicals and molecules transforming from inorganic, inert to life, that there's this big transition. Is this just an area where I mean, is that a reflection of our lack of knowledge, or is it more than that that gives you pause there?
Oh, it's not a reflection of our lack of knowledge. It's really the fact that we're beginning to understand that the chemical processes you need to transform molecules into the very first cells could not happen productively under the conditions of the early Earth. They can happen amply in a laboratory under carefully controlled conditions, but they can't happen on the uncontrolled conditions of the early Earth. But that would be one example of a key event in life's history. Well, the very first cells on Earth would have been what are called prokaryotic cells, cells like bacteria and the archaea. But one of the next key transition in life's history would be the emergence of what are called eukaryotic cells or complex cells. And this again is a place where the evolutionary paradigm comes up short. The models that are being proposed to explain that transition simply fall short. Another key transition.
Can you give us a couple, or at least throw out the names of some of the models that are out there?
Well, one of them would be the endosymbiont hypothesis, for example. And while on the surface it looks like such a great explanation, when you begin to penetrate and look at the details, you wind up seeing quite a bit of significant issues associated with that idea that simply look to be insurmountable at this point in time. Another key transition would be the appearance of body plans, where you're going from single-celled organisms or colonial aggregates of cells to systems that consist of fully integrated organ systems, where you have complex multicellular life forms.
So this is kind of like in the Cambrian explosion is where we're talking about.
Yes, the Cambrian explosion is documenting that transition in the fossil record. But even apart from all the peculiarities of the Cambrian explosion for the evolutionary paradigm, is this inability mechanistically to explain the genesis of body plans in complex multicellular organisms. Another key transition would be the origin of sexual reproduction. Another key transition would be the origin of consciousness, another key transition is the origin of what I would call human exceptionalism. And so these are key transitions in the history of life that are the key transitions where the evolutionary paradigm comes up short, where experts working in these areas recognize the very significant hurdles that remain that simply are not readily overcome through current understanding of the evolutionary processes.
You know, that's a very interesting point, is that there are these mechanisms or these transitions that scientists readily agree are important transitions. It sounds like there's a lot of work has been invested in these. There are ideas out there, but yet the models still seem to come up short. And a lot of these seem to be kind of key features that would be ascribed to a creator. I find that aspect interesting there.
Well, what's remarkable, to build off of your point, Jeff, is every time you see these transitions in the history of life on Earth, they all happen explosively, where there's a sudden appearance of life on Earth. The sudden appearance of eukaryotic cells. This is called the eukaryotic Big Bang. The Cambrian explosion, the explosive appearance of body plans in the fossil record. Even with the origin of human exceptionalism, it seems to have a Big Bang type event associated with it. And those to me are signatures for a creator's involvement. And so, in other words, if I would embrace theistic evolution, I still would be in the position where I wouldn't have explanations for these key transitions in the history of life on Earth. And yet, when I look at the features of those transitions, not only, again, do they defy an evolutionary explanation, it looks as if a creator must have been involved.
So one last question. Evolution does seem to explain quite a bit. So, I mean, you've identified some problems there, and I obviously agree that those are significant problems. But what do we do with what evolution explains so well? Do we just have to throw that out the window?
No, I mean, we can embrace aspects of the evolutionary paradigm, without necessarily embracing the totality of the paradigm. So there's certain aspects of the evolutionary framework that are well evidenced. And so, again, I think we can embrace aspects of this. But it's also worth recognizing that in many instances, what people would point to as being the most compelling evidence for an evolutionary history of life on Earth, namely the fossil record and the shared biological features that organisms display, could also be readily accounted for through a creation model framework, where those shared features could reflect not common ancestry, but common or shared design that is implemented through the handiwork of a creator. And the progression of life that we see through the fossil record could also be understood as the purposeful progression of a creator who has some kind of objective in mind as he's creating life, throughout Earth's history.
Well, thank you, Fuzz. I appreciate your comments. Evolution does seem like this kind of scary topic to talk about. But when it comes right down to it, understanding the definitions are incredibly important. And when you understand those definitions, you actually have some powerful tools to go spread the gospel. I would encourage you to go to reasons.org/2819 and check out RTB's latest book on this, Thinking About Evolution. We'll give you great resources to understand what those definitions are and how to use them to go out and spread the gospel.
That does it for us this week on 2819. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helps equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we hope that you'll check us out on YouTube and subscribe to the show. And also you'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. And we'd love to hear what you want for Christmas. Right?
Yes, that's right. Also, if you'd like to hear the audio version of 2819, you can get us on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe podcast.
See you next week.